Subscribe to my YouTube channel, share it with your friends, and comment your thoughts. Thomas stood at the edge of his land, eyes squinting against the setting sun. His fingers, stiff and calloused from years of hard work, gripped the worn edges of his weathered hat. He had been in this field since he was a boy, and nothing felt more right to him than the feel of the soil between his fingers. Yet today, the land felt different. The air around him was still, unnervingly still, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The faint hum of distant traffic from the nearby highway was the only sound that broke the silence. There should have been a buzz of activity. The water should have been flowing, quenching the crops that stretched endlessly in front of him. But it wasn't. The pipe, the one that had supplied the farm for as long as he could remember, was dry. He turned his gaze to the rusted metal structure that held the irrigation system, a spidery tangle of pipes that ran from the main water supply to his farm. It had always been reliable, always. But today, the metal was as lifeless as the dry earth beneath his boots. Thomas felt a tightness in his chest. His farm, his livelihood, depended on this water. Without it, the crops would die within a matter of days. The corn, which had been growing tall and strong, would wither. The wheat, once golden and strong, would crumble. The soybeans, so green and full of promise, would soon be nothing more than brittle husks. His throat tightened, but he refused to let the fear show. He wasn't some city slicker who could be pushed around. He was Thomas, a farmer born and bred, and he wasn't about to let anything, anyone, take away what was his. The sun was low now, the orange light casting long shadows across the barren soil. He glanced back over his shoulder, knowing he was running out of time. The water, which had been flowing steadily for weeks, had been cut off with no warning. No call, no notice, just a sudden, unexplained stop. And the silence that followed had been deafening. He pulled his phone from his pocket and unlocked it with shaky hands. The screen flickered to life, revealing a message from his neighbor, Dave. Water's cut off. No word yet on when it'll be fixed. Guess we're in the same boat. Dave was a good man, one of the few remaining farmers in the area who hadn't sold out to the big corporations yet. He'd always been there for Thomas, offering advice and helping when times got tough. But this was different. They'd both received the same message about the water, but neither of them knew what was happening. He slid the phone back into his pocket and took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. He couldn't afford to panic. The sun would set soon, and without the water there was no chance of saving his crops. It wasn't just the money he would lose, it was his life. This farm had been passed down from his father, who had inherited it from his grandfather. Generations of farmers had worked this land, and now, in his hands, it was slipping away. But it wasn't just the water. Something about this felt off. The whole situation felt orchestrated, like someone had planned this for a long time. The sudden disruption in the water supply, the lack of communication, something didn't sit right. And then, as if on cue, a shadow flickered at the corner of his eye. He turned, eyes scanning the horizon. At first he thought it was just the fading light playing tricks on him. But no, this was real. A blacked-out military vehicle, the kind that had no place in a farming town, was slowly rolling towards the edge of his property. The tires kicked up a cloud of dust, and the vehicle's sleek, imposing shape cut through the quiet like a predator stalking its prey. Thomas's heart skipped a beat. He knew immediately that this wasn't just any vehicle. This wasn't the kind of truck that delivered feed or supplies from the local co-op. This was something much more ominous. The truck slowed to a stop at the edge of the field, and Thomas watched, frozen, as a man in a crisp military uniform climbed out of the driver's side. The figure moved with purpose, his posture rigid, his steps deliberate. The man didn't look around at the land, at the crops, or even at Thomas, who was standing just yards away, his heart hammering in his chest. No, the man's gaze was fixed straight ahead, unblinking. Thomas recognized him immediately. General Robert Lacey. Lacey wasn't someone you saw in small farming towns. He was a figure from the shadows, someone whose name was whispered in dark and corners, whose influence stretched far beyond the rural communities. He wasn't here by accident. His presence on Thomas's farm could only mean one thing: trouble. Lacey was a man known for his connections in high places. Rumors about him swirled through the local farming community like a wildfire, but no one ever spoke of them aloud. It wasn't safe. Everyone knew that. The general took a few slow steps toward Thomas, his boots sinking slightly into the dry earth with each step. Thomas wanted to turn away, to run, but his feet felt like they were rooted to the ground. His mind screamed at him to do something, anything, but he stood there watching the general approach. "Thomas," Lacey's voice was low, measured. "We need to talk." The words sent a chill down Thomas's spine. There was no mistaking the tone in Lacey's voice. It wasn't a question. It wasn't even an invitation. It was an order. Thomas swallowed hard. His fingers clenched into fists at his sides. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. He knew what Lacey was capable of. Everyone did. He wasn't just a man in uniform. He was a man who could make things disappear. Farms, families, reputations, all could be swept away with a single phone call. But Thomas wasn't the type to back down, not without a fight. "What are you doing here?" he managed to say, his voice rough from the knot in his throat. Lacey didn't answer right away. Instead, he glanced over Thomas's shoulder, his eyes scanning the field. For a moment, it felt like time had stopped. The world around them fell, silent. Even the rustling of the wind seemed to quiet down. "I think you know why I'm here," Lacey finally said, his gaze still fixed on the land. "The water." Thomas felt his stomach tighten. This was it. This wasn't about a broken pipe. It wasn't just a malfunction or a simple mistake. This was part of something much bigger. "I don't know what you're talking about," Thomas said, the words tasting bitter on his tongue. "The water's been cut off. I need it to finish my harvest. You can't just—" Lacey turned his eyes back to Thomas, cutting him off with a sharp, cold look. "You're not in a position to ask questions," he said, his tone cold and final. "You're in a position to listen." Before Thomas could respond, the sound of another engine cut through the silence. He turned just in time to see another vehicle, a black SUV with tinted windows, creeping over the horizon, moving slowly, deliberately, toward them. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end as it drew closer. Lacey didn't look away, but Thomas saw the slight tension in his jaw. The second vehicle was arriving as if it had been expected, as if the whole situation had been planned. A sense of dread settled deep in Thomas's chest. This wasn't just about water. This wasn't just about his farm. It was about something much bigger, something he was only beginning to understand, and he was about to find out exactly what. The SUV pulled up to a stop, its tires crunching over the cracked dirt road, the vehicle's tinted windows giving nothing away. The air between Thomas and the general grew thicker with each passing second. His throat felt dry as he swallowed hard, trying to steady his nerves. But the unease inside him refused to let up. Lacey didn't move as the SUV came to a halt. He kept his gaze fixed on Thomas, and for a moment Thomas could have sworn he saw a flicker of something in the general's eyes, a brief, fleeting emotion that disappeared just as quickly as it had appeared. The SUV door opened, and a tall, imposing figure stepped out, their silhouette framed by the orange light of the setting sun. The stranger was dressed in black, his movements sharp and deliberate. Unlike Lacey, who carried an air of quiet authority, this man radiated power. He had the look of someone who didn't just speak with words, but with actions. Someone who could erase lives with a single gesture. Thomas felt the familiar unease crawl up his spine again. It was like a storm was gathering just beyond the horizon, and he was caught in the middle of it. The man in black walked toward them, and Lacey turned slightly, his eyes never leaving Thomas's. "This is Agent Hale," he said in his gravelly voice, finally breaking the silence. "He's here to assist me." Thomas nodded stiffly, though the name meant nothing to him. What did it matter who the man was? What mattered was why they were here, standing in the middle of his farm at dusk. Why, out of nowhere, had the water been cut off, and why had Lacey and his mysterious associate appeared? "I didn't ask for your help," Thomas said, his voice rising before he could stop it. "What's going on here? Why is the water cut off?" Lacey's gaze remained cool, almost amused. "You'll understand soon enough." The man in black, Agent Hale, didn't speak a word, but his presence was enough. The weight of it was suffocating, and Thomas couldn't help but wonder how far this went. How much power did these people really have? How many lives were in their hands? "You're asking the wrong questions," Lacey continued, his tone flat. "But don't worry, you'll have your answers. In time." Thomas opened his mouth to retort, but before he could get a word out, Hale spoke for the first time, his voice as cold as the steel of his uniform. "The water isn't the issue here, Thomas. The issue is something much bigger than your crops." The word sent a shock through Thomas's chest, and his heart skipped a beat. It wasn't just about water. What did that even mean? He was staring at the general and the agent, trying to make sense of it all, but the pieces didn't fit. Lacey took a step forward, his boots crunching on the gravel beneath him, his eyes narrowing as he assessed Thomas. "We need your help. There's something you have that we need." Thomas's mind raced, trying to catch up with what was happening. What did they want from him? His eyes darted to the dry irrigation system, then to the man in black, who stood silently watching him like a hawk. He was trapped in a web he didn't understand. "I don't have anything," Thomas said, his voice tense. "You've cut off my water. You've come here and—" "Enough," Lacey interrupted, his voice suddenly sharp. "This isn't about the water. This isn't about your crops. This is about something much more important." The general paused, looking over his shoulder as if to check if anyone else was listening. Then with a heavy sigh, he turned back to Thomas. "What we need is information, information that you're holding." Thomas frowned, feeling a mixture of confusion and growing suspicion. What information could he possibly have that would interest? Someone like General Lacey, someone who had the power to control entire regions. "I don't know what you're talking about," Thomas said, his voice faltering despite his best efforts to remain calm. "I'm just a farmer. I'm not some spy or—" "You're not," Lacey cut him off, his voice colder now. "But you were close, very close." Thomas's heart skipped a beat. "Close to what?" Lacey's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile, more a twisted mockery of one. "The government, Thomas. You were close to something bigger than you realize. And now we need you to remember." Thomas felt the world tilt beneath his feet. This didn't make any sense. He was just a farmer, nothing more, nothing less. What did the government want with him? What did he know that could possibly matter? "Listen, you've got the wrong guy," Thomas said, the panic rising in his chest. "I don't know anything about your government, or whatever it is you're talking about. I'm just trying to keep my farm running. That's it." Lacey and Hale exchanged a glance, and the brief look that passed between them sent a cold shiver down Thomas's spine. It was like they were weighing him, assessing him, deciding how much to reveal. Hale took a step closer, his eyes narrowing as he fixed Thomas with an unsettling stare. "Do you remember the meeting? The one that took place here, on your land?" "6 months ago?" Thomas blinked, the words coming at him like a slap. "Meeting? Don't lie, Thomas," Lacey said, his voice low and dangerous. "You were there. You met with someone, and that someone was very important." Thomas shook his head, trying to push through the fog in his mind. "A meeting? 6 months ago? Nothing about it came to him. He couldn't remember anything like that. But the way Lacey was looking at him, the way Hale was watching him so closely, made him realize that this wasn't a game. These men weren't here because of his water. They were here because of something far more dangerous. "I don't know what you're talking about," Thomas repeated, his voice weaker now. He could feel the walls closing in around him. "We'll refresh your memory," Lacey said quietly, and the way he said it made Thomas's skin crawl. "Agent Hale?" Hale stepped forward again, his cold gaze never leaving Thomas. "We know about the land deal, Thomas, the one you were approached about, the one you turned down." The words hit Thomas like a punch to the gut. The land deal, the one he had been offered just 6 months ago by a group of businessmen who had come into town, promising him a fortune in exchange for his land. It had seemed too good to be true. They offered him millions. They promised him security. They told him he could live out the rest of his life in luxury if he sold his farm. But Thomas had turned them down. He had refused to sell his father's land, no matter what the offer was. "I told them no," Thomas said, the words coming out almost in a whisper. "I didn't want their money. I wanted to keep the farm." Lacey smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was more like a predator's smile, a smile that promised trouble. "You don't understand, Thomas. The land isn't just yours. It never was. And now you're a part of something much bigger than your little farm." Thomas's knees felt weak beneath him, but he forced himself to stand tall, to meet the general's gaze head-on. He didn't know what was happening, but he knew one thing for certain. These men were dangerous. They had power, more power than anyone in this small town, and they weren't here for answers. They were here for something else. "Let me make this simple," Lacey said, his voice growing even colder. "The water, the land, the deal you refused, it all connects. And you're right in the middle of it." Thomas felt his heart race as the weight of Lacey's words settled in. There was no escaping it now. The water, the strange military vehicles, the mysterious men, it was all part of something much larger. And the general had just given him a glimpse into a world he never even knew existed. The air felt heavy with unspoken words. Thomas stood, rooted to the spot, as General Lacey and Agent Hale's piercing stares seemed to slice through him like cold steel. The once familiar land now seemed foreign to him, as though the very earth beneath his boots had turned against him. His farm, his pride, his life's work, all of it was now part of a game he didn't understand. For a moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the distant rustle of the dry leaves in the wind, a soft reminder of how close to disaster they were. Thomas felt a pang of guilt as his eyes briefly flicked to the crops, their once vibrant green stalks now brown and brittle, under the weight of dehydration. His entire year's work was on the brink of collapse. And for what? What had he done to deserve this? The general broke the silence, his voice like gravel being crushed underfoot. "I know this isn't easy, Thomas. I know you've worked hard for everything you have, but you need to understand something. This is bigger than your farm. It's bigger than anything you can imagine." The words hung in the air like a weight Thomas couldn't escape. He shook his head, trying to make sense of it all. "I don't care about your games, your power plays, or whatever it is you're trying to do. I care about my farm, my family's legacy, and I won't be intimidated by you or anyone else." Lacey's expression remained unreadable, but there was a shift in his posture, a subtle recognition of Thomas's defiance. "You misunderstand me. I'm not here to intimidate you. I'm here because you're in a position to help us. You can't escape this, Thomas. You're in this whether you want to be or not." The general's words settled in Thomas's gut, like a stone. How could this be happening? Why him? He had been a farmer all his life, not a pawn in some twisted conspiracy. And yet here he was, standing face to face with a man whose very presence seemed to suggest a far-reaching power beyond comprehension. What do you want from me? Thomas asked, his voice thick with frustration. Why are you here? Why the water? What do I have that you need? Lacey didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked over at Hale, who had been standing silently, his arms crossed in front of him. Hale's cold eyes flicked over Thomas, but he said nothing, his expression unreadable. Finally, Lacey spoke. You know about the land deal. Don't. You, the one you turned down. That's what this is all about. Thomas felt his heart race at the mention of the land deal. He had tried to forget it. The businessmen had come in, their offers too tempting to ignore. But something about it didn't sit right. They had insisted on secrecy, on non-disclosure agreements that were too extreme. There was something strange about them, something he couldn't quite put his finger on, and when he had rejected their offer, he had hoped the matter would just fade away. I don't know what you're talking about, Thomas said, his voice a mixture of fear and confusion. I turned them down. I didn't want anything to do with it. Lacey's lips curled slightly, the smile less than comforting. You should have taken the offer, Thomas. If you had, things would have been much easier for you. Thomas could feel the weight of the general's words settling over him like a thick fog. And if I had taken it, what would have happened? Hale finally spoke, his voice low and deliberate. You would have been paid handsomely. You would have been set. You're for life. But there's more. The people behind that deal aren't just business tycoons. They're connected, far more than you can imagine. And now they want your land. They've wanted it for a long time, and they'll stop at nothing to get it. Thomas felt a chill run through him. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but they didn't make any sense. These men, with their military presence and veiled threats, were tied to something much larger than the land he farmed. The land he had worked on for decades. For a moment, Thomas felt the ground slip beneath him. You can't have it, Thomas said, his voice rough with emotion. I'll never sell. It's my family's land. I don't care who they are. I won't. Lacey raised a hand, silencing him. This isn't a choice, Thomas. You're not in a position to make demands. This is bigger than you, bigger than your family. This is about control, and the people behind this want your land because it holds something valuable. Valuable? Thomas echoed, confused. It's just land. It's worth something, sure, but there's nothing special about it. Nothing worth all this. The general's eyes narrowed, and he took a slow step forward. You don't understand. Your land is part of a much larger plan. It's tied to resources, to energy, to things that go beyond agriculture. Do you think the offer was just about your crops? No, Thomas. It was about access. Thomas swallowed hard, trying to make sense of the cryptic words. Access to what? To power, Hale interjected, his voice flat and emotionless. To resources that no one else has. Your land sits atop a deposit of rare minerals, something that could change the course of history. But you refused the deal, and now the price for your defiance is more than just a simple rejection. The words hung in the air like a bomb about to explode. Rare minerals hidden beneath his land? Thomas felt his knees weaken, but he refused to show any sign of fear. Instead, his mind raced, trying to understand the enormity of what he was being told. They're not just trying to take my farm, he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. They're after what's underneath. Lacey's lips quirked up at the edges. Exactly. And you think I'm just going to hand it over? Thomas's voice shook with a mix of anger and disbelief. You think I'm going to let you walk all over me? Lacey's expression turned grim. You don't have a choice. You're in this whether you like it or not, and if you continue to resist, the consequences will be dire. Hale took a step closer, his cold eyes locking onto Thomas's. We can make this easy, or we can make it hard. But either way, the end result is the same. Your land will be ours. Thomas stood tall, trying to ignore the pounding in his chest. His mind was racing. He had always known there were powerful people out there, controlling the flow of money and power, but he had never realized how deep the corruption ran. These men weren't just here for his farm. They were here for something that could reshape the world, but he wouldn't let them take it, not without a fight. "You'll have to kill me first," Thomas said, his voice firm. "I won't give up my land, my family's legacy, without a fight." Lacey's eyes bored into him, as if weighing his words. For a long moment neither man spoke. Then Lacey finally broke the silence, his voice low and measured. "Don't mistake my intentions, Thomas. I'm not here to kill you. But if you keep refusing, we won't hesitate to make things uncomfortable." Thomas felt his blood run cold, but his resolve hardened. "I'll never give up," the general nodded, as if acknowledging his defiance. "Then you're going to find out just how far we're willing to go." With that, Lacey turned and began walking toward the black SUV, his steps heavy and purposeful. Hale followed behind him, his gaze still locked on Thomas, as if warning him of what was to come. Thomas stood motionless, his heart pounding in his chest. The sun had set, and the world around him was swallowed in the darkness. The field, once a place of peace, now felt like a battleground. The game had changed, and Thomas was about to learn just how high the stakes really were. The night had descended swiftly, the darkness spreading across the field like a thick cloak. Thomas stood alone, his heart still hammering in his chest, the silence of the farm pressing in on him from all sides. The words Lacey had left him with echoed in his mind. "We won't hesitate to make things uncomfortable." He didn't know exactly what that meant, but it didn't take much to guess. These men, these powerful figures, weren't the type to make empty threats. They would act. They had the means, the power, and the ruthlessness to make good on their promises. But Thomas wasn't going to give in. He had fought too long and too hard for this land to let it slip through his fingers now. This farm was more than just a livelihood. It was a symbol of everything his family had stood for, the sweat and sacrifice of generations of farmers who had worked this soil. No matter what Lacey or Hale had planned, Thomas knew he couldn't back down. The wind whispered through the trees, a haunting reminder that time was running out. The crops were dying. His farm was slowly being choked by the lack of water. Every minute that passed without action meant more lost hope. But despite the pressure, despite the desperation clawing at his chest, Thomas refused to let fear take over. He paced back and forth, his thoughts racing. What could he do? The general had made it clear that the land wasn't just any land. It was valuable, vital, connected to something larger than he could comprehend. Rare minerals, resources buried beneath the earth, power. He didn't fully understand it, but he knew one thing for certain. He was part of something much bigger than himself. He needed answers. He needed to find out exactly what was happening before it was too late. But how? Where could he go for help? As he walked toward the barn, the faint sound of a car engine reached his ears. His heart skipped a beat as he turned toward the road. The headlights of a vehicle pierced through the darkness, its approach slow and deliberate. Thomas's first thought was that it was Lacey and Hale returning, their threats hanging over him like a sword waiting to drop. But as the car drew closer, he saw the shape of it, a battered old sedan, one that didn't belong to any of the men he had met earlier. The car came to a stop near the gate, its headlights flickering before dying out completely. Thomas felt his pulse quicken as the figure in the car door opened. A woman stepped out, her silhouette framed by the glow of the taillights. She was tall, with dark hair that flowed loosely around her shoulders. She wore a long coat, its edges fluttering slightly in the wind, and Thomas could tell she wasn't a stranger to the farm. As the woman approached, Thomas's heart gave an unexpected jolt of recognition. It was Anna, his cousin, the one who had left the farm years ago for the city, leaving behind everything. She had disappeared from his life without a trace, but here she was, standing in front of him, looking as determined as ever. Anna. Thomas's voice cracked slightly, the confusion in his voice obvious. What are you doing here? How did you— I never wanted to leave, Anna interrupted, her voice quiet but steady. But things changed, and I couldn't stay. I had to go, and now I'm here because you need to know the truth. Thomas stared at her, still struggling to process her sudden appearance. The last time he had seen her, they had argued, and she had left in a hurry. It had been years since he had heard from her. What was she talking about? The truth about what? Thomas asked, his voice hoarse with a mixture of frustration and disbelief. She stepped closer, her gaze scanning the empty field, making sure no one was watching. The land, the deal you turned down, it wasn't just business. It was a power play, and you've been caught in the middle of it all. Thomas's stomach tightened. I don't understand. What do you mean? What deal? Anna looked over her shoulder one last time before she spoke. The land isn't just valuable for its crops. There's something beneath it, something that the government and the people behind this whole operation have been after for years. Your land sits above a network of underground resources. They've been trying to get access to it for a long time. That's what they've been offering people money for. But it's not just minerals, Thomas. It's something much bigger. Something that could change everything. Thomas felt his heart sink. Underground resources, something bigger. It sounded like the kind of thing that only belonged in a conspiracy thriller, not in his quiet farming community. Yet here was Anna, telling him everything he had feared but couldn't comprehend. What do you mean, something bigger? Thomas asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Anna looked around again, as if making sure no one was listening. Then she leaned in close, her eyes full of urgency. The government, Thomas. They've known about the resources under this land for years. They've been trying to get access to it for decades. But it's not just the minerals. There's technology, buried deep beneath your fields. Technology that could revolutionize energy, transportation, everything. They've been trying to control it, to monopolize it, and that's why they've been pushing farmers like you to sell. They don't want to do this the right way. They don't want to buy the land. They want to take it by force. Thomas felt his world tilt on its axis. He had always known that there were powerful people out there, but he hadn't realized just how deep the rabbit hole went. He had thought the offer from the businessmen had been about money, about securing his future. But now he understood that it was about control of something much larger than a few acres of farmland. They've been after this land for decades. Thomas's voice was thick with disbelief. Anna nodded. Yes, and when you turned them down, you made things worse. Now, they're coming for you, and they won't stop until they get what they want. Thomas felt a wave of nausea rise up in him. He had thought Lacey and Hale were just trying to get his land because of its value, but now he understood the truth. They were here because of what lay beneath. And if they were willing to go this far, how far were they willing to go to? Get it? What do we do now? Thomas asked, his voice shaking. How do we stop them? Anna hesitated, looking conflicted. There's only one way, Thomas. You have to expose them. You have to go public with what you know. You have to let people know what's really going on. Thomas shook his head, his thoughts racing. Expose them. It seemed impossible. These men weren't just anyone. They had power, resources, and connections that spanned the globe. How could he, just a simple farmer, take them down? But how? Thomas asked, desperation creeping into his voice. They control everything. They control the water, the government, everything. Anna reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small black flash drive. She handed it to Thomas, her hands trembling slightly. This is all the evidence you need. It's everything they've been hiding. You just have to get it to the right people. The truth will set you free, but you have to act fast. They won't stop until you're out of the picture, and if you don't act now, it's over. Thomas stared at the flash drive in his hand. He didn't know what was on it, but he knew it was his only shot at stopping the men who had been threatening him and his land. This was his chance to fight back, to expose the truth. He looked up at Anna, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and fear. "Thank you. I won't forget this." She gave him a tight smile, her eyes filled with determination. "You don't have much time. Don't let them win." As she turned and walked back to her car, Thomas stood there for a moment, his mind spinning. This was it. He had the evidence. Now he had to get it to the right people. But where would he go? Who could he trust? His heart was heavy with the knowledge that his fight was far from over. But for the first time in days, Thomas felt a spark of hope. He could do this. He could expose the truth. And in doing so, he would protect everything he had fought for.